Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Proverbs chapter 21. So let's get right to it. I did a little detour. Verse 3 was kind of, I think, so universal, relevant for today. But I'm going to just pick it up here and go back over. Actually, these first three verses really are so relevant. He said, "The king's heart is like streams of water in the Lord's hands. He directs it whatever he chooses." I'm just kind of read, especially in the political climate that we live in. Um, and I'm certainly not going to get into the depths of the political argument today, but just know, he says, it's in God's hands. Literally, he directed as he chooses. And then it says, all a man's way seems right before him, right to him, but the Lord evaluates the motive. Now, that's the thing that you need to look at in whatever you do, that God can look past all and see your motives. And then doing what is right, righteous, and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. This is something that is, you really should, really should take this to heart. Evaluate what you think are religious deeds and how you think doing what you think is good. How is that acceptable to God? In other words, if you do all of the good, righteous deeds in this hand, but you hate your brother in the other hand, what good is that? What good is that? I'm just going to indulge just a little bit more. You think about all of the denominations that were just outright racist. What good was those denominations? Literally, what good are those denominations? Think about the false Christianity religions, the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, where people think they're serving God. And just with these two verses right here, a man's way seems right to him. So think about people who would be a Mormon, right? But God knows your motive. But at the same time, all of these things I think have a place. So let me move on, because I could get a lot deeper, more deeper into that. But my point is, those three verses, look how relevant they are to our lives right now, today. Verse 4, the lamp that guides the wicked. And then it says, haughty eyes and an arrogant heart is sin. Now, don't think you can escape this by pointing to someone else's sin. Okay, so enough said there. Verse 5, the plans of the diligent certainly lead to profit, but anyone who is reckless certainly becomes poor. So again, diligently. We live in a generation, I don't know how it turned out, but it seems like almost the entire generation of kids today are just foolish. Okay, verse 6. Making a fortune through a lying tongue is a vanishing mist, a pursuit of death. Okay, many liars out there. I'd say this, buyer beware. Verse 7. The violent, the violence of the wicked sweeps them away because they refuse to act justly. You know, it's kind of interesting. Eventually, sometimes you will see people get their just due. Verse 8, a guilty man conduct is crooked, but the behavior of an innocent is upright. Better to live on the corner of a roof than to share a house with a nagging woman. A number of years ago, we knew a couple where the wife was nagging. Now, she's not the only one, but a friend drove up to their house and he started looking up. And the wife go, "What are you doing?" And he was looking at the roof. He go, "Oh, I'm looking for so and so." You know, better to live on the corner of a roof than to share a house with a nagging wife. How true that is. Okay, verse 10. A wicked person desires evil. He has no consideration for his neighbor. When a mocker is punished, the inexperienced become wiser. When one teaches a wise man, he acquires knowledge. And you remember early on, Proverbs tell us we have to seek that knowledge. We have to seek that wisdom. We have to want to be wiser. Verse 12. The righteous one considers the house of the wicked. He brings the wicked to ruin. The one who shuts his ear to the cry of the poor will himself also cry out and not be answered. Very interesting. You see, there's a lot about the poor in the Bible, about caring for the poor. And look, it is so easy for us to turn our eyes away from the hurting. But God doesn't. So as Christians, as followers of Christ, neither should we. Verse 14. A secret gift soothes anger, and a covert bribe fears rage. Verse 15. Justice executed is a joy to the righteous, but a terror to those who practice iniquity. Now, just think about that one, right? How many times when every now and then you see justice? You know, it's kind of interesting how that we always want to see justice. It's something that kind of gnaws at us when we see evil not being punished. Notice he said it's a terror to those who practice iniquity, though. Verse 16, the man who strays from the way of wisdom will come to rest in the assembly of the departed spirits. Interesting. One of the few times you see kind of the mentioning, and this is in a direct way, of hell. In other words, you have to say, well, where is the assembly of the departed spirits? And notice he uses this term, departed spirit. That in itself is interesting. Because think about this. There is a doctrine that's been around for ages called soul sleep. And there are some Christians who even believe that. There are some Christians that believe that when you die, you sort of just kind of go to sleep. You're inactive into the resurrection. The question is, where is the assembly, now notice this, of the departed spirits? One of the beliefs for those who believe in what's called soul sleep, you're talking about your body. And of course, your body rots, your body decomposes. So now what about you? So when we talk about what is you, then we talk about you are a spirit, you have a soul, and you live in a body. All of that. That is what man is. Man itself is a complete being, comprises of three parts: spirit, soul, and body. Your spirit and soul are the immaterial, eternal part. I'm sorry, you are the eternal you. In other words, when you die, your spirit separates from your body. Consciousness doesn't cease. We see that, for example, with the Transfiguration. We see Jesus talking to Moses, who had been dead for some 15 centuries, and Elijah, who had been dead for some 8 centuries. Okay? So, and they were talking. They weren't in their bodies, they were talking. So what was it? The departed spirits. So the question becomes, where is the assembly of the departed spirits? Okay? Well, there's a lot of discussion on that. Jesus gives the illustration where what was called typically Abraham's bosom. The idea was that the place of these departed spirits who died before the resurrection of Jesus Christ, a place not of suffering. And it's not to be confused with purgatory, because there was no suffering. In other words, Lazarus was not trying to, as the Catholics teach, about purgatory, you get further purification. Okay. So anyway, after the resurrection of Christ, as Paul puts it, to be absent from the body, to be present with the Lord. Okay, very interesting. So he says, the man who strays away from wisdom will come to rest in the assembly of the departed spirits. Now, the departed spirits here is very vague in general. The context of the statement itself would say hell. Okay, hell. And by the way, and I'm not saying that this statement in of itself confines itself to just those who go to hell during the time of this writing. It could be both. Um, Samson found his way in the assembly of the departed spirits. He was foolish in his life, and his foolishness, though he was righteous, landed him in the assembly of the departed spirits. Verse 17. The one who loves pleasure will become a poor man. Whoever loves wine and oil will not get rich. In other words, if all you did was just sit back, isn't it amazing too that you can go to any poor neighborhood and find what we call winos? Pleasure. People who love pleasure. That's all you do. And that's a part of your sinful nature. If that's all you do, seek pleasure, he says you will not get rich. You think about those who are rich and who continually to increase in their riches. Pleasure is only a part of their life. They don't come to just only seek pleasure. All right, verse 18. And I would say this too, that wine and oil would also, I'm going to add in drugs, right? Getting high. Verse 18, the wicked are a ransom for the righteous, and the treacherous for the upright. It is better to live in the wilderness than with a nagging and a hot-tempered wife. Second time he said this, right? That's the first time, right? Better to live in the wilderness than with a nagging, hot-tempered wife. Yeah. So, wives, what kind of wife are you? Or do you nag? Notice, hot-tempered. 20. Precious treasure and all are in the dwelling of a wise person, but a foolish man consumes them. Now, this is interesting if you want to look at the parable of the 10 virgins that Jesus talked about. Precious treasures and oil in the dwelling of wise person. But then he says, but a foolish man consumes them. Jesus tells a story about the wise virgins who was waiting for the wedding master to appear, the wedding groom. When he came, this was a kind of a Jewish custom. When he came and called for the virgins, maybe we would call them maids of honor. They got up to trim their oil, but 5 of them, 5 were foolish, 5 were wise. The wise had oil, but the foolish did not have any oil. And they were left out of the wedding procession, okay? Because of that, because they didn't have the oil. Verse 21, the one who pursues righteousness and faithful love will find life, righteousness, and honor. He said, the one who pursues righteousness and faithful love. And again, Jesus said, those who thirst and hunger after righteousness will be filled. Verse 22. A wise person went up against a city of warriors and brought down its secure fortress. Now notice that a wise person. Notice he says with a city of warriors. So in other words, it's not the might, but the wisdom that can win a war. Verse 23. The one who guards his mouth and tongue keeps himself out of trouble. Now, how this wisdom here, notice, how many times have our mouths gotten us in trouble? Think about that. How many times have our mouths literally gotten us into trouble? When we just shut up, just not said something. And notice this is kind of a wide statement. We could apply this to pretty much a lot of areas, couldn't we? I mean, if you guard your mouth, you will keep yourself out of trouble. I think about the trouble that that I put myself in by talking too much. But just that think about that. Just talking too much. We could apply that to so many applications here. Most people get in trouble talking to the police. Most people get in trouble gossiping, telling secrets. Okay. Verse 24, the proud and arrogant person named mocker acts with excessive pride. Now, one of the things you see with people that are like this, people who are arrogant. Notice that. Notice that name mocker. Pride. Hmm. Verse 20. Anyway, verse 25. A slacker's craving will kill him because his hands refuse to work. We can also say a lazy person who refused to work, who refused to even fill out an application right. Okay, verse 26. He is filled with cravings all day long, but the righteous give and don't hold back. So, in other words, the slacker will always need, because they won't work. But the righteous, he says, will give and won't hold back. Verse 27. The sacrifice of the wicked person is detestable. How much more so when he brings it with ulterior motives? Think about that. The sacrifice. And don't think God doesn't know. That's why I said before, religion, you can cloak yourself under the brand of religion. But notice he says right here, God thinks your offerings are detestable. Okay? You see this in churches, by the way, all the time. Okay? I won't even get into some of these offering gimmicks. But I think about this. When you have these preachers that lie to you about how you're going to give your offering, think about your motive and why you give your offering. See, if you're sowing for the hundredfold return, what is your true motive for sowing for the hundredfold return? So you can have a jet like the false prosperity preacher that's peddling that. You want to live like that. You want the big house. He said the sacrifice of the wicked person is detestable. That's just an example. And then he says, how much more when he brings it with ulterior motives? Verse 28. A lying witness will perish, but the one who listens will speak successfully. He said, a wicked man puts on a bold face, but the upright man considers his ways. He says, no wisdom, no understanding, and no counsel will prevail against the Lord. You know, ultimately, we're going to see that with the showdown with the man of sin or the beast when he tried to fight against Jesus. But we also can see this with a lot of times when people try to pass laws. You think about all of the dictators who attempted to wipe out Christianity, who attempted. No wisdom, no understanding, and no counsel will prevail against the Lord. It says, a horse is prepared for battle, for the battle. A horse is prepared for the day of battle, but victory comes from the Lord. Now, obviously, we mostly won't see if we're not in war, but if you were a man of war, um, let me put it this way: if if I could communicate with the Ukrainians, I would say you need to rely on the Lord. You need to pray to the Lord. The horse is prepared for the day of battle. Now, on the other hand, you could almost look at kind of the not so successful attempts from Russia, and that's just an example I'm giving here. So I'm not going to get into the politics of that at all. But he says victory comes from the Lord. So my point is, you need to trust the Lord. Whatever battles, and let me just put this: whatever battles you may be fighting yourself, you know, in your everyday life, trust the Lord for that, for your victories. Alright guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. See you in the next study.